Hi, I'm John Stevens,
This is Matt Russell.
and this is Pod Have Mercy.
This is Pod Have Mercy. This is Matt Russell. Today, John is traveling around the world and saving lives and doing the things that John Stevens does. And so we have the opportunity to interview and to spend some time with Marlon Lizama.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marlon Lizama. I am a poet. I am a co-founder of Iconoclast Artists. And I came to Chapelwood with Matt Russell. And I think the things that we are doing now are so intertwined. And you know, we're kind of knotted up together now that it seemed like that was the best move, not only, for Matt, but also for our program and myself. I really love the idea of coming to a place that allows us to create and be creative, but also allows us to share our visions with them, so.
I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about who you are, because your story, when I met you, your story is really kind of endemic of a majority of Houston stories, right? Yep. And as I've gotten to know you, it's both typical and very untypical in many ways. And so I'd love just to hear about where you're from.
Yeah. Well, I guess just to start from the beginning, my mom is from El Salvador, my dad's from Puerto Rico, and I always say that I came to Texas to become a Mexican. Yeah, I came here when I was 9 years old, and Houston was, back in the day, I moved into an area of Houston called the East End, which now they call Edo, but back in the day they used to call it Second Ward. Yeah. And I grew up in this little neighborhood within right next to Second Ward, which is called Magnolia, which is like a little island. Like nobody leaves this place. There's no reason to leave this place simply because everything you need is there. Yeah. There's the panaderia where you get your bread. There's the place where you go get your tire tubes. There's everything's there. There's a taqueria. There's everything. We were lucky that we had a mom who was she was a romantic, and she really believed in going and exploring and seeing the world. So back in the day, she used to give us $2 each, and she allowed us to get on the bus, and you can go anywhere, which is bad parenting. Come to think about it, a 9-year-old should not be on the bus traveling on their own.
Looking back.
But back in the day, that's what they did. And I got to see the city. I got to just go different places. One of the best places I ever went was the Museum of Fine Arts. Back in the day, I want you guys to picture the way I would dress. It was basically cut off shorts and chanclas and
What are chanclas?
Sandals.
Oh, okay.
Sandals or chanclas, which means the weapon of every grandmother in Latin America. Yeah, so
cut off shorts,
sandals, and whatever T-shirt was clean enough. I went to the Museum of Fine Arts, man, and that was the first time I ever experienced art. And I was lucky that I got there on a Thursday because it was free. I got to see Monet, I got to see Rembrandt, but then I saw Basquiat. And for some reason, that guy just spoke to me.
Talk a little bit about who Basquiat is.
Oh, man. Basquiat is an artist who came up through Andy Warhol, but he was literally just an artist that was just free.
Like New York, 1980s.
New York,
right?
1980s,
Yeah.
Graffiti. I mean, like this guy he's the kind of guy that would paint something and you're like, I can do that, but you don't.
And can't.
And can't because you don't have the audacity that he has, right? Yeah. And this word audacity followed me my entire life because I realized that I wanted to be that guy. I would go back home. The following year, I started this thing called breakdancing. Please don't ask me to explain breakdancing. I started breakdancing.
But you can go see the movies breaking
there you go.
1, 2, and 3.
There you go. Yeah. So I started breakdancing with a couple of friends of mine. And I was introduced to hip-hop culture. And I was introduced to hip-hop music and and I was introduced to breaks and funk and jazz and big bands. But also, I started having friends that were from different sides of towns, different parts of towns. And what we would do is we would get together and practice, which is unheard of back in the day because you don't go to different areas, especially because the gangs were so, I mean, they were everywhere. They were rampant. And so you didn't wear certain colors in certain neighborhoods. And what we were doing was very, at this time now looking back, reflecting, this was very revolutionary to Houston because nobody was doing that. Especially kids of color, and we started a crew, and around the same time, my mom came up with this crazy punishment for me. Every time I was bad, she would make me read Pablo Neruda poetry, which was an insane punishment. Right. So instead of whooping me, she would be like, "You read these books and you tell me what it's about, and you read me poetry," and by age 11, I was the most romantic kid in the world. Like, you guys don't even know. But I started to like poetry. I started to love it. And I started to correlate poetry with hip-hop. And I stumbled upon a poet named Saul Williams. And Saul Williams was literally, he was the Basquiat of poetry to me. You know, it was this black man with dreads, and he was sampling hip hop songs in his poetry, and he was just so free when he flowed, and he took this hook from Public Enemy, which is a social justice hip hop group, and it's what I got, come and get some, get on up, hustlers of culture, and I'm like, you can do that?
That's amazing.
I didn't know you could do that because until now, all I knew about poetry was Federico Lorca and Pablo Neruda and these men who wore berets and they had a pipe in their mouth and they were so well put together. And here's this man who's telling you, like, no, just do what you feel.
And he was talking out of his own context and his own life. And so it wasn't like he was reaching into something that was foreign to him. It was the substance of his own experience.
Oh yeah. And I didn't know that I didn't know that there was romantic aspects of my life. Because to me it was just struggle. And to me it was survival. When you're a young immigrant, there's no romantic aspects of your life.
Right.
It's just about survival and camouflage. My mother sat me and my two brothers down in the table, and she told us, you have to learn English as fast as possible. That is your number one thing.
Yeah.
And my students, the students that I work now, have heard that request and speech from their parents. And they forget Spanish, or they forget their second language or their third language sometimes. And it's this idea of, in order for us to survive here, you have to forget who you are. And so this poet like spoke to me so much, but I was just like, maybe it's only one person. And through Saul Williams, I started listening to James Baldwin. And all of this when I was like 14 years old, by the way. I was getting really educated. I was being educated by just word of mouth. And these older hip hop guys that were in my group that were basically saying, oh, you like that guy? Well, listen to this guy. You like this guy? Listen to that guy. And this was my education was forming this way. So every time I would go to school, it would really clash with the things that I was learning outside of school because James Baldwin was really educating me. It challenged everything that was safe, and it challenged everything that I wanted. You know, it challenged everything that my mom wanted for us. And where do you go from that? And I remember having a conversation with my mom where I was just like, I think I want to see the world. And my mom did the coolest response ever. From a single immigrant parent who didn't speak English, she was like, you can do it, mijo.
Wow.
Why not?
Wow.
That was her response. Now, she didn't have a plan for me.
But permission.
But permission, right? Like she was like, why not? You know, I knew what my life was going to look like. I was going to get a job and get a house and pay rent. and which there's nothing wrong with that, but I mean, I just felt like there was so much more. We got really good at breaking. We got really good. Yeah, my crew.
What's the crew's name?
My crew's name is Havoc Coro, and we got really good. We got invited to France, and I remember.
How old were you?
I was 16 years old when I first went to France.
16 years old.
16.
Did you have to get permission?
No,
from your mom
I went
to
with a note. We went with a note. And it said, I'm allowing my child to go to France. And back in it, this was before 9/11. So yeah, we went to France and they paid us $500 each.
Wow.
Which is a fortune in the 90s, right? I was like, oh my God, I'm getting to do what I love. And you're paying me? We started traveling more and more and more. The State Department had heard about us, and they asked our group, hey, can you guys do some programming that can actually work with communities in third world countries? And we're like, oh my gosh, that's too much. Like, we can't do that. And they were like, we'll pay you $5,000. I'm like, yes, we can do that. You should start with the $5,000 before you.
And then the request.
And then the request.
Can I say this? As I've gotten to know you, it's easy for me to kind of skip over this part of your history, but here you are, a 14 to 16-year-old immigrant kid that has come to the States in a prototypical way that immigrants do, which is any way possible.
Yeah.
And your mom, a single parent, raising 3 boys, keeps house and home together for them somehow, and probably so. And you enter into a community of people that kind of buffer you then from gangs and from a thousand other ways that other people have to put food on the table in places in our city where there's not enough money.
Yep.
And you get really good at this thing called breakdancing. Not just really good, but like Havocoro becomes one of the top breaking crews in the entire planet.
Yeah.
So much so that when I got to know you and I Googled your name and Havocoro, like I fell down this rabbit hole of Google videos, watching your crew at Red Bull, watching your crew in France or in Poland or in Russia or in El Salvador, all over the world dancing.
Yeah.
And this is when you're between the age of what, 16 and
16
19?
and 19, yeah. So by 19 years old, I had been to 20 countries. And this is the thing that about subculture, the power of subculture. It allows you to be a dreamer, right? And that's why a lot of people don't understand about the power of these subcultures of like, whether it's music, whether it's skateboarding, whether it's punk rock. I mean, it allows you to dream with a bunch of people that just want to be dreamers and they want to be accepted. That's why people join gangs.
Yeah.
You know, people don't join gangs to be tough. People join gangs to be accepted and to be loved and to belong. When you have never had someone say, hey, I love you, I'm going to accept you, I'm going to fight for you, that's to you, that's all you're listening. That's all you're hearing. You're not looking at Bloods and Crips, you're looking at family. And at this time, my breaking crew was basically everything I had. I stayed writing. I kept writing while I was traveling with my group, and I really got into writing. I really got into storytelling, and I became really like the voice of the group when it came to our stories and who we were. And I started traveling alone. I would go places and I would just talk to people, and I realized that I wasn't scared of humanity anymore. You know, before I had a fear of people. I had a fear of people that didn't look like me. You don't speak to people that don't look like you. You're not comfortable around people. And you know, I think I can build rapport with my students that I work with because I know exactly what their perspective is. And it's hard to trust people. It's hard to trust someone that won't hire my mom. It's hard to trust people that my mom works for them, right? Like it's never an equal thing for us. In my house, there's 3 pictures. There's Jesus, there's Virgin Mary, and then there's Frida Kahlo. Right?
The Holy Trinity.
The Holy Trinity, yeah.
Of any Latin family, right?
and you know, my mom never spoke about feminism. She never spoke about, you know, her dreams, simply because she had 3 jobs. She had to pay rent, But for me, like that Frida Kahlo print of, I don't know what 99 cent store it came from, but it represented her dreams and her, like, her love of art and music and dance. And it really resonated with me, and I carried that with me in my heart. And I always looked at traveling as such a blessing. And who gets to do things like this?
One of the themes that that comes up both in your writing, in your poetry, in your public speaking, and with your students that I see a lot is this real honoring of the place that you're from, that should not be muted. It should not sit in a shadow, but that the place you're from is the headwater of joy and pain and suffering and possibility. It's like, it's life, right? And as I've gotten to know you and watch you interact with, because in so many ways, Marlon, you are a border crosser. You transcend communities and people, and you're a connector at heart. And as I've watched you over these last 5 to 6 years, just the way you move in the world, you are constantly pulling people into themselves in a way that gives them honor. The first poem I ever heard you do was a poem called "Where I'm From." And I'm wondering, would you do that?
Yeah. So this is actually one of my first poems, and I call it "Where I'm From," and this is basically to educate people about where I'm from. Where I'm from, we live life in summer. We speak in family tongues about family through neighbors' eyes. Our dialects change through ever-changing barrios, cuadras, calles, y casas ajenas. Where I'm from, La Lechuza, El Diablo, and La Llorona all become curfews, and there is no talks of American birds and bees. Reputations follow you like 14-year-old backpacks on our 14-year-old soldiers. Where I'm from, education is as crazy as equality. Tree branches become a sign of disciplinary actions. Moms are mommies, tias are titis, grandpas are popos, fathers have always been gone. Óyeme, where I'm from. Music is our narrator, moving us like revolution once did. Young developing flowers shaking and stepping to beasts they do not understand yet. Perversion is an uncle not allowed near the kids, but is always welcomed home. Where I'm from, the dinner table is time of conferences of who needs to go get a job, who needs to go get some water, or who just needs to go. Sana sana culito, the rana's our doctor. Mosquitoes is always ignored, for the immune system of our ancestors is too strong. Where I'm from, children carry sun like descriptive terms. Dirt necklaces tell you when it's time to go in, along with, oh yeah, chico, ya métete! Cause you see, where I'm from, Jesus is Jesucristo, and he lights up every mantle like American Christmases. Where I'm from, everyone is a Christian and has a Catholic neighbor. Love is what is allowed, or how good a young couple is at sneaking around. Babies make babies and make families close, and machete's even closer. Where I'm from, my grandmother is beautiful. Aunts and uncles are extended parents, and everyone has the right to beat your butt. Bom, toma! Where I'm from is purple, yellow, green, and gold, and it is beautiful. So.
I love that, dude. I'd love to talk about the program of Iconoclast Artists and spend some time talking about that, because in many ways, you and I represent kind of an improbable friendship, improbable relationship.
Yes.
I mean, the city of Houston is set up in many ways, the world is set up in many ways for you and I never to meet.
Yeah.
And if we were to meet, for it to be really transactional, but not to have kind of a mutual friendship where there's kind of real intimacy and trust.
Yeah.
And then out of that also a real vision where you're leading in so many ways what the church is going to look like, what the church could look like if we were obedient and surrendered enough. So I meet you through a mutual friend, and who encourages us to. He calls me and says, "There's a guy I know that has some crazy ideas. Would you please get him off my back, and would you go take him to lunch?" And that's the introduction I had to you. So
if I had $1 for every time someone said that about me. Charles Rotremel has been a mentor of mine since I was like 15 years old. He was the first white man I've met that I interacted with. He was he was a really good guy, and
ran an organization called
Youth Advocates back in the day, which now is Revision. And and I called Charles, and I'm like, I have this great idea. I want an old building in downtown Houston, and I'm gonna create the most amazing art school in the world. And he looked at me and he was like, that is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Like, are you kidding me? Nobody's gonna go to this thing. You need to be in the schools. You need to be where the kids are. And I'm like, well, can you help me? He goes, I'm not gonna help you. It's like, but I'll connect you with someone that probably can. And then now I met you.
You know, I just think now it's all coming together. I wonder if Charles is trying to get me off his back too, and he just stuck us together.
Yeah. So when I went to meet you, it was for some reason it was just like, yeah, this is gonna happen.
We sit down over a plate of tacos, and you share this idea about some kind of crazy school program where kids would be taught both poetry, creative writing, but through really their own lens of their life.
Yes.
And that it would be interactive. Yeah. And in the middle of that, you're talking about these things called community. Like, you're not wanting just to do program delivery. You're wanting to create a whole community of kids within these schools. And in the middle of that, I just got hooked. And I remember walking away thinking, this is something different. And if the church could come alongside and say, because you were living in these spaces, you'd been working in schools, you knew all the teachers already, you'd been doing workshops for teachers in creative pedagogy and writing. And so what you were needing was just a partnership. Yeah. Right? You need someone that could help create some structure and some life around that. And so I remember walking away thinking, oh, maybe this is what it means to build bridges. Yeah. That you have somebody in a community that has all these resources, all these connections, all these friendships, and you've got a church that's dying on the outside trying to get in the game, but doing it in really uncoordinated ways. Could it be as easy as connecting two people and watching what happens? And it, I mean, not that it was easy, but that's what happened.
Yeah, I think it was a fun hard.
Yeah.
It was a fun hard thing to do. I remember my first meeting with the principal, which was at Sharpstown High School and then at Lee High School, and literally I was like, hey, I want to try out this new program and give me the kids that are 1 foot out the door. And their faces lit up because, of course, we'll give you those kids, right? You know. And in the beginning, sharing the "Where I'm From" poem with my kids and telling them where I was from and what I've been through and how I write and where my stories come from, where my poetry comes from, it lit them up. Yeah, because it was storytelling. Right. It was storytelling in places that storytelling doesn't exist, that poetry doesn't exist, right? And it's dreaming with me for 1 hour. You get to forget that sometimes you don't eat dinner at night. You get to forget that, you come from an abusive home. You get to forget that you're failing every single class, that you only come to school once a week, and that's probably to eat. Yes. And for this one class, it's not about grades. It's not about your dress code. It's not about anything. It's about you and your stories, where you come from, and your dreams and your nightmares. And one of the coolest things that a kid ever told me, he was like, I was like, hey man, I really want you to write about positive things. Like, can we do that? And then he goes, sir, there are no puppies and rainbows in my neighborhood. I feel comfortable writing this because this is what I lived through. Yeah. And these kids have taught me so much simply because they're so honest and genuine. So all I can be is honest and genuine with them.
So the guts of the program started as a creative writing program, but I remember as we started, you being very adamant that where we wanted to be was in under-resourced or no-resource schools. Yes. And so you kind of had this idea that Yes Prep and some other schools around the city had resources, and they are doing a great job with those resources. But you were really dedicated and saying that we wanted to be in schools, like you had said, where kids have not just one foot out, but there is a whole story that has already been written for them, so that if these kids slip into what's been called the school to prison pipeline, well, that's just normal, because these kids end up there, right? And so I remember the first day meeting you being quite adamant, saying, this is where I want to be located. I want to be in places where everybody else has given up on these kids. So our first year, we started in 3 schools. And one, actually it was 2, but 2 lockdown units. And I remember that distinctly because we were showing up in class time, partnering with teachers that were really and probably there as well. I mean, some of these teachers, all the teachers that we've worked with and principals have just been amazing, and really, I think they're called to this kind of life and work. And we've partnered with them in creating really an academic, what I'll call an academic writing program, which you have instantiated and called like this inspirational program. And so it's not an either or, but a both and. We've seen writing scores go up. We've seen community be built. And so our first year, we were meeting in these 3 or 4 schools in the lockdown units. And you had this idea that at the end of the year, you wanted to pull together the best poetry out of the year, and you wanted to create a book out of it. I got published very late. I got published like at 29, and I would always ask myself, man, if I would have been published like at 16, 17, like where would my career be now, right? And I was like, why not do that for the kids we work with? You know, I remember with this first idea, when I told the students, I'm like, hey, we're going to publish a book. And a perfect response from one of my students was like a real book? That was their response. And it was a great, but like there was so much to that response, right? Like a real book, because, you know, we don't see ourselves like that. That is a funny line, but that is such a deep line. And I'm like, yes, a real book, a real poetry book, an anthology, using the word anthology to them and calling them writers and poets. It made them feel uncomfortable. And I told them, I'm going to keep calling you writers and poets until it doesn't feel uncomfortable. And that's how you change bad habits, right? Like you keep doing it until it's not weird anymore, right? I tell my students I love them. I tell them I love them. And if it's going to feel weird, it's going to feel weird until it doesn't feel weird, until you can say it, until you can tell your brothers and sisters, I love you. And that's one thing that we do in our classes, that we try to connect. Because if you're going to get anything out of my class, you're going to get a group of people that are going to follow you the whole year, and they got your back. Right? And so when I introduced the idea of this anthology, I was like, hey, listen, you guys are going to have to write some really good poems. And they were like, we don't know how to do that. And I'm like, we're going to learn. In the beginning, we're going to write a lot of bad poetry, but at the end, we're all going to be writers and poets. And so I remember praying and just be like, please, God, let me just at least get 50 good poems that I can create this book. The first year, we got 700 entries. 700. I remember
each
that. We were drowning.
We were drowning in poetry. Each student literally was turning in like 10 poems. They were just writing them and submitting, because they understood that I only had so many poets that I can feature. And they were just, oh my gosh, I want to make this book. And the kids at the lockdowns,
they were
through their probation officers, through their case managers, they were sending me poems, and that humbled me so much, because I know that I was dreaming of this, but at the same time, like, it was happening. It was happening.
And on the other side of that, I'm a local pastor. And beginning to wonder, what does youth ministry look like? Now, there's always going to be a need for churches like Chapelwood to have really robust youth departments and student ministries, which we do, which is affecting my children, right? I mean, it's invaluable. That's only one part of the equation. The other question is, where do students live? Where do they live, move, and have their being? And so part of that was realizing that maybe youth groups and youth work work needs to also be located in schools.
Yep.
And so for the church then to tunnel towards, right?
Yep.
Because the model that we have in the 21st century is that if we build it and we have this kind of youth building, then the friends will bring friends and we pull people into the building and into the program, which is very important.
Well,
The other model is that kids exist in these schools that may never darken the door of a church because they either don't have friends or because of the boundaries and of time and transportation or whatever boundaries there are to come to that church. How does the church then show up in the places where these kids might never show up? And so part of that was what I was wrestling with. And as you were creating this program on the inside of these schools, we began to really think through how does a church show up in these places as well? One of the ways that we did that was the anthology that you had created, that we were creating in these schools. We had went to the Museum of Fine Arts and asked them if they would host the night that we released this book.
yes.
And they were amazing. They said, of course.
Of course. And to me, that was such a big deal because the Museum of Fine
I remember
Arts
you were going
was
nuts.
the first place that inspired. It all went back to the Museum of Fine Arts. When they said yes, I suddenly
out
became
crying.
that 14-year-old kid at the front of the Museum of Fine Arts, not knowing if I could step in there or not.
Yeah.
Or if people like me can be there.
Yes. And so here we are invited into the Museum of Fine Arts, into their main gallery space, and they kind of just opened the doors wide open.
Yes.
And the idea was we're going to sell this anthology, and all the money from it was going to go to a scholarship
Yes.
to really propel the dreams that had been awakened in these kids' lives. And
Yes.
so we were kind of expecting maybe 100 or so folks to show up to this thing.
Hopefully.
Hoping.
Yeah, hoping.
And you and I had paid folks, our
Yeah.
friends, we begged, borrowed, and,
Yeah.
under the threat
I
of
gave my
death.
friends ultimatums of, if you don't go, we're not friends anymore. You better show up.
Well, and the night came, and the first anthology in the Carolyn Wise Law Building had over 400 people.
Yeah.
And I remember that night standing and just welcoming folks, and then you emceeing and welcoming the kids down the line, the 10 or 12 poets, and watching. One of the poets was a kid that had been homeless for 2 years.
Yep.
Lived on the street and ate out of a trash can and went to school, kept going to school because it's the only place he could eat.
Yeah.
And another kid that was a Syrian refugee that had lived in a burned out car for 2 years, worked in a hospital mopping up blood, was finally with his brother and a group of other 14-year-olds walked across into Jordan from Syria, and was in a refugee camp until they found that his mother had been repatriated and given asylum in Houston, and he was put on a plane, and 2 days later was in your class.
This kid was literally learning English through Google Translate while he was in class. His first poem was about his accent. And I remember this was his first completed work as an American. He was so proud of this poem. And just to get an excerpt from it, is his accent is like a baby trying to communicate with a grown-up world. A hungry boy who spits and eats the alphabet, a picture into his first street. This is a kid who cannot communicate at a McDonald's to order a meal, but he just created this poem with these words that just flow like water.
Yes.
And when I first heard it, and I realized that this is what we are supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And we followed this kid from 9th grade all the way to 12 and saw him graduate, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the impact part that we were talking about over some tacos 5 years ago.
Yeah,
like
that's
to
right.
watch these kids graduate, to follow them, for them to email me poetry, for them to not only email me poetry, but also, hey, where do I go to get my license?
Right.
Like, hey, how do I get food stamps? Like, hey, can you connect me with some housing?
Yes. It's amazing. So with the money that came from the sale of these books, kids have gone to college. we have created and helped create a catering company for a young man and his parents that we've been able to give out certificates or help pay for certificates for welding. We've sent kids to camp in the summer. Basically, we said to the kids in our program, this is your money. What do you want to do with it? This is a social entrepreneur venture. This is what you created and what your sweat equity actually created in the world. Yeah. And people are purchasing this. This is yours. What do you want to do with it?
Yeah.
So let me kind of fast forward a bit. So the program starts both in this partnership with a local church and with you, this kind of local writer and activist and a person that's within the school systems advocating for change, both within the system and in connecting with these students. We start with 3 or 4 schools the first year in a lockdown unit and a book.
Yes.
If we fast forward it now to our 6th year, we're in 19 schools.
Yes.
We have
in Houston. And in 5 different schools in Galveston. We're in 2 different lockdowns, and we are in Wharton, Texas.
And Aldine and in Cy-Fair.
And Cy-Fair, yeah.
So out of those 19 schools, we now have teaching fellows that are connected to the program as well. We have connected with both teachers and poets. We because of kind of reading through the first kind of volume of poetry, these kids were talking about really kind of many times traumatic experiences of their past and of their present. And so we created a social and emotional learning program that kind of walks alongside of the writing program as well now. And we're in the midst of developing an app where all of our curriculum will sit on it, and teachers will have access to the living curriculum that is on the app. And we've just entered into a partnership with the University of Houston Graduate College of Social Work to do research with this hidden population of kids that we're now in community with. And it's amazing to me to think about 5 years on. That over a plate of tacos and your dream, what God has done to really draw the church into places that it cares about but doesn't know how to get to. Does that make sense? Yeah. And a lot of times it's easier for us to go to a Mexico mission trip than it is to go to the East End.
Yes.
Right? And I think that what you've helped show me is that it's in the East End where I can have sustained connection and my life can be transformed day in and day out because of these relationships that we're now in.
Yeah.
The possibility of that is just amazing. But at Chapelwood, Iconoclast Artists is really a new ministry and a new program. And one of the ways that folks can, I think, be introduced to what we're doing is happening on April 9th. April 9th at Chapelwood, we'll have what's called Iconoclast Sessions. We will bring 2 poets in. I think one of those poets is going to be you, Marlon, which I'm totally excited about. And we'll have a bunch of our students that will be here as well.
Yes.
Students that would never darken the door of this church normally will be here. And our student ministry is collaborating with us to provide kind of this place of radical hospitality. And we just think, Chapelwood just thinks that through the audacity of love and the presence of God that we can bridge divides and we can really kind of nurture improbable friendships in this world. So we've got that in April. And then in May,
May 7th.
May 7th at 7 p.m.
7 p.m. at the Museum of Fine Arts.
Is our book release.
Yes.
And we will release 2 books of poetry for our 5th volume. One will be in English and one will be in Spanish with some Quiche.
With some Quiche, some Quechua. And so we're super excited, and we welcome everyone to come meet our program and come get involved. Come see a class. Our doors are always open. We invite people to come see what we're doing all the time. You can go to iconoclastartists.org and you can connect with us that way. And so whatever you're interested in on Instagram, we are at Iconoclast Artists. And then on Facebook, we're at Iconoclast Sessions.
I'm Matt Russell.
I am Marlon Lizama.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.